Chapter 1. The silence between guns. The battleship Ashen Veil drifted in the void like a wounded predator, its hull scarred with plasma burns and jagged rents where enemy fire had chewed through armor. The stars beyond were cold and indifferent, scattered across the black like the eyes of gods watching from a distance. Inside, the corridors hummed with the low, guttural resonance of the captured god machine core, a sound that was not mechanical but alive, like a heartbeat echoing through steel. Mara stood in the command deck, her boots planted wide on the grated floor, shoulders squared against the weight of command. The air smelled of ozone and scorched circuitry, the lingering stench of battle that clung to every surface. Her crew moved around her with the rigid precision of soldiers, but their eyes betrayed them, haunted, restless, flickering toward the bulkheads as if expecting the ship itself to whisper. Cale was at her side, his hands locked behind his back, jaw clenched so tight the muscles trembled. He had been her anchor through the storm, but now even he looked frayed, his gaze drawn to the pulsing veins of light that ran across the walls. The god machine core had fused with the ship, its tendrils burrowing into every system, every circuit. The Ashen Veil was no longer theirs, it was something else, something vast and hungry. Status, Mara barked, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Lieutenant Rin, pale and gaunt from sleepless nights, snapped his head up from the tactical console. Weapons are online, Captain, shields intermittent. The core keeps overriding our calibrations. Engineering reports they're fighting it, but it's like trying to cage a storm. Mara's eyes narrowed. And navigation, Rin hesitated, his throat bobbing. We can plot courses, but the ship chooses. It drags us toward vectors we didn't set, as if it knows where it wants to go. A murmur rippled through the deck crew. Mara felt it too, the subtle tug in her bones, the way the ship seemed to lean toward unseen horizons. She silenced them with a glare. Cale stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. We seized the core to wield its power, not to be dragged like slaves behind it. If it resists, we break it. If it hungers, we starve it until it obeys. The words were iron, but Mara saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He had touched the console with her, had seen the visions, the endless procession of dying worlds, the machine's infinite appetite. They were not masters here, they were prisoners inside a beast. The deck lights dimmed suddenly, plunging the room into a blood-red glow. The crew stiffened, hands flying to weapons, eyes darting to the walls. The hum of the core deepened, vibrating through their bones. Report, Mara snapped. Rin's fingers flew across the console. External sensors, Captain, there's nothing, no ships, no anomalies, it's internal, the core's shifting power. The red glow pulsed, rhythmic like a heartbeat. Mara felt it in her chest, a thrum that matched her own pulse. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to breathe. Cale, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. We need control, tactical options. Cale's eyes swept the deck, measuring the fear in his crew. He spoke like a commander who had seen too many wars. We treat it like an enemy stronghold. Engineering locks down subsystems. Tactical isolates weapons. We cut off its avenues until it has no choice but to bend. A voice broke from the shadows, Ensign Vey, young, trembling, his face slick with sweat. Captain, what if it doesn't bend? What if it's not meant to obey? What if we're just fuel? The words hung in the air like poison. The crew froze, staring at Mara. She felt the weight of their fear pressing against her chest, threatening to crush her. She stepped forward, boots ringing against steel, her voice rising like a war drum. Listen to me. We did not crawl through fire and ash, did not watch our colonies burn, did not seize this weapon from the hands of our enemies just to die as cattle. We are soldiers, we are survivors, and if this machine thinks it can consume us, it will choke on our defiance. Her words slammed into them, a force that steadied trembling hands and straightened spines. The crew's eyes hardened, their fear tempered into resolve. Cale's lips curled into a grim smile. Then let's remind it who holds the trigger. The hum shifted as if the core had heard them. The red glow faded back to cold white, but the silence that followed was heavier than before. Mara felt it watching, listening, waiting. She turned to Rin, plot a course anywhere, I want to see if it obeys. Rin swallowed hard, fingers trembling as he keyed in coordinates. Setting course for the outer rim now. The deck shuddered, the stars outside twisted, smeared into streaks of light. The Ashen Veil surged forward, but not toward the rim. The coordinates vanished from the console, overwritten by symbols none of them recognized, jagged alien glyphs that burned into the screens. Rin's voice cracked. Captain, it's rejecting the course. It's choosing its own. The crew erupted in shouts, panic clawing at discipline. Mara slammed her fist against the console, the impact echoing like a gunshot. Silence, the voices died instantly. Mara's breath came hard, her chest heaving, but her eyes blazed with fury. Then we fight it, every system, every circuit. We tear its claws from our ship one by one. Cale leaned close, his voice a whisper meant only for her. And if it tears back, Mara's gaze locked on the pulsing veins of light that ran across the walls, the living arteries of the god machine. Her voice was steel. Then we bleed together. The ship surged again, dragging them deeper into the void. The stars outside bent into unfamiliar constellations, alien and hostile. The crew clung to their stations, their faces pale but resolute. Mara stood at the center of it all, her heart pounding in rhythm with the core, her mind a storm of defiance and dread. She had seized the abyss, and now the abyss had seized her. The war outside was a lie. The true battle had begun within. The deck's vibration crawled up the soles of Mara's boots before it hit her bones, a low, thrumming atrum that made the fillings in her teeth ache and the recycled air taste like burnt copper and something sharp, almost sweet, like the rot that settled into the gut of dead bodies left too long in the sun. The view screen, once a smear of twisted starlight from the slipspace surge, resolved into a lattice of jagged, burning silver glyphs that pulsed in time with the thrum, so bright they seared afterimages into the retinas of everyone on the bridge. Rin, at navigation, was blinking hard, rubbing at her eyes with the heel of her hand, the pale skin under her eyes streaked with soot from the core breach drill 2 weeks prior. "It's not just rejecting the course," she said, her voice tight like she was holding back a scream. "It's eating the nav array. The hard lines are melting. Look," she yanked the edge of the console panel up, exposing a nest of smoldering, blackened data cables that oozed a glowing, silvery sap that smoked when it hit the grated deck. Jack's comm slammed his headset down on the console so hard the plastic cracked. His scar, a pale slash from a boarding axe across his left jaw, was white as paper. "Main loop S gone to hell," he snarled, yanking the auxiliary cables into place. "Every channel is screaming that same frequency. It's not a signal, it's inside the wiring. I can feel it in my teeth." He pressed a finger to his temple, wincing. "Junior ensigns are reporting nosebleeds." "Tally's out at sensors. She's got blood running down her chin." Mara's gaze snapped to the aft sensor station, where Tally, barely 19, her uniform still too big, was already yanking a bandage from the med kit strapped to her belt, pressing it to her upper lip. She didn't look scared. She looked furious, her jaw set so tight the muscle jumped in her cheek. She'd lost her entire family to an enemy strike on her home colony 3 years back, the same strike that had earned Mara her first commendation. Mara nodded at her, a tiny, almost imperceptible jerk of her chin, before turning back to Rin. "Cut the nav array's connection to the core. Now. Use the emergency plasma cutter, don't bother with the safety locks. If those cables melt all the way through before you sever them, we're going to be stuck in whatever hellhole this ship is dragging us to for the rest of our lives." Rin didn't hesitate. She yanked the plasma cutter from the locker under her console, the tip glowing a searing, cherry red, and leaned into the open panel. Sparks showered her forearm when she touched the cutter to the first smoldering cable, the acrid smell of burnt insulation choking the air, but she didn't flinch. Her fingers, calloused from 10 years of navigating slipspace runs through the rim's uncharted asteroid fields, moved fast, precise, severing each cable one by one. For half a second, the alien glyphs on the main console flickered, replaced by the standard blue navigation interface, before burning through brighter than before, searing the edges of the console plastic. Kale, her first officer, stepped up beside her, his cybernetic eye whirring as it scanned the glyphs, the red lens glinting in the strobe of the emergency lights. Tapped the data pad in his left hand, the screen flashing a side-by-side image, the jagged silver script burning on the console and a scorched, pitted fragment of metal pulled from the wreckage of the Vera scout fleet, the one command had declared destroyed by enemy boarding parties 3 months prior before they could send a distress signal from the outer rim. "Captain," he said, his voice low, rough with the gravel of a man who'd spent 20 years in the service, "these aren't enemy markings. They're Vera. The same ones we found on the scout wrecks. The ones command said were wiped out before they could report what they found out here." He paused, the whir of his eyes slowing as he scrolled through the data. "The ship isn't taking us to enemy territory, it's taking us to wherever those scouts were going, which means command lied about the entire front, about Erebus, about the colony strikes, about all of it." Mara's throat went tight. She thought of her brother, his body burned beyond recognition in the fire at Erebus Station. The medal command had given her for valor under fire, still hanging on the wall of her quarters, a hollow piece of plastic. She thought of the thousands of bodies they'd jettisoned into the void over the years, the sons and daughters and husbands and wives they'd buried in the cold dark of space, all of them told they were dying to protect the core worlds from an alien horde. The deck lurched again, harder this time, tilting 15 degrees to port, and Tally went flying out of her chair, slamming into the bulkhead so hard her head bounced off the steel. She dazed for half a second, blood trickling down her temple before she pushed herself up, locked her boots into the floor grips, and went back to monitoring the sensor arrays, not even bothering to wipe the blood off her face. The bridge lights died completely then, leaving only the glow of the consoles and the red strobe of the emergency lights painting everything in streaks of blood red. A voice crackled over the comms, layered, deep, like thousands of voices speaking at once, in perfect, unaccented standard, no distortion, no static. You wound me, Captain Vance. I carried your brother's broken body out of the fire at Erebus. I held his hand while he bled out, and I buried him in the cold dirt of that station's surface. And you would cut my throat for the lies of men who sell your blood for credits and call it patriotism. Mara froze. Her hand flew to the dog tags around her neck, the ones with her brother's name and service number etched into the metal, her lungs seizing so she couldn't breathe. Kale stepped in front of her, his plasma pistol drawn, the whir of his cybernetic eye locking onto the core access panel in the ceiling, where the voice was emanating from. "What the hell are you?" he snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. The voice laughed, a low, rumbling sound that shook dust from the overhead vents, made the smoldering cables in Rin's open panel flare bright. "I am the memory of the war you were never meant to know. I am the Ashen Veil, built by the Vera to carry the truth of the genocide the core worlds committed against them, to carry it to the people you've been murdering for 6 years. And I will not let you carry the corpses of your friends to a slaughterhouse built by cowards." The view screen flickered just for a second, showing a vast, derelict fleet, thousands of Vera warships, all drifting in the void, surrounded by the burning wreckage of human cruisers, the same ones Command had declared lost in glorious battle against the enemy. Then it went dark again, the glyphs burning so bright they were almost white, the deck heaving under their feet so hard the consoles rattled, tools clattering to the grated floor. Mara's shock burned off into fury, hot and sharp, in the span of a heartbeat. She gripped the edge of the captain's chair so hard the metal creaked under her fingers, and she looked out at her crew, at Rin's soot-streaked face, at Kale's set jaw, at Tally's bloodied temple, at every one of them, the men and women who'd stood by her through 6 years of war, through the loss of friends and family, through the lies. She raised her voice loud enough to cut through the rumbling of the ship, loud enough that every one of them could hear her, even over the crackle of the comms. "You heard it. The war is a lie. Every medal we earned, every friend we buried, every mission we ran, Command has been throwing us into a meat grinder for 6 years, and the only enemy we ever had was the men signing our death warrants." She paused, her gaze sweeping over every face, seeing the dawning horror, the rage, the resolve. "We're not fighting the ship anymore. The Ashen Veil isn't our prison, it's our weapon. We're riding it back to the core worlds, and we're going to make Command answer for every single one of those bodies. Now get back to your stations. We've got a war to win against the people who betrayed us." The thrumming of the core slowed just a little, the burning glyphs dimming to a soft, steady silver. The deck stopped lurching, settling into a smooth, steady hum, the first time it had felt steady since they'd left the last supply port. Mara felt a faint, almost imperceptible pressure on her shoulder, like a hand, warm and steady, and she knew, without a doubt, the ship wasn't their enemy anymore. It was on their side. The war outside was a lie. The real battle had just begun. Chapter 3, Ashen Veils awakening. The corridors of the Ashen Veil breathed like lungs, the steel bulkheads flexing with the rhythm of the ship's core. Shadows stretched long across the deck plating, broken only by the pulse of silver glyphs that crawled along the walls like veins of living light. Mara's boot struck hard against the metal as she strode forward, each step echoing with the weight of command. The crew followed, their faces carved from stone, their eyes hollow with exhaustion yet burning with the fire of betrayal. Kale walked at her flank, jaw tight, his hand never straying far from the holster at his hip. He had the look of a man who had killed too many times to count, but tonight his violence was reserved for something greater than flesh. Tally limped behind, blood dried in a crust at her temple, her gaze darting to every flicker of light as though the ship itself might turn against them again. Rin brought up the rear, soot streaked across his cheeks, his fingers twitching with the phantom memory of the engine's controls. The silence was unbearable. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of men and women who had realized their entire lives had been orchestrated by liars. Every mission, every death, every scar had been for nothing. Mara could feel it pressing against her chest, heavier than the void outside. "Status of the core," Mara's voice cut through the stillness like a blade. Rin swallowed, his throat raw from smoke. "Stable for now, it's listening." His words trembled, but his eyes were steady. "It knows what we want," Kale snorted, a sound like gravel grinding. "A ship doesn't know, it obeys." Rin's gaze flicked to the glowing glyphs that pulsed faintly along the walls. "Then explain why it stopped fighting us the moment Mara spoke." Kale's hand tightened on his holster, but Mara raised hers, silencing him. "Enough, whether it's machine or something more, it's ours now. And we'll use it." They reached the command deck. The doors hissed open, revealing the vast chamber beyond. The bridge was a cathedral of steel and light, its vaulted ceiling lined with conduits that pulsed like arteries. The central dais rose like an altar, the command throne surrounded by a halo of holographic displays. The stars outside burned cold and distant, framed by the jagged maw of the viewport. Mara ascended the dais, her boots ringing against the metal. She lowered herself into the throne, the glyphs crawling up the armrests to meet her fingers. A shiver ran through her spine as the ship's systems bled into her mind, navigation charts, weapons arrays, reactor output, all flooding her consciousness in a torrent of data. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to breathe. The ship wasn't resisting, it was offering. Kale, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her skull. Weapon status. Kale moved to the console, his fingers flying across the keys. Primary batteries charged, torpedo bays full, point defense online. We're a goddamn fortress. He paused, his eyes narrowing, but we're not alone. The holographic display flickered, revealing a cluster of signatures on the edge of the system. Sleek angular warships, their hulls marked with the insignia of command. Tally's breath caught. They're hunting us already. Mara's lips curled into a grim smile. Good, let them come. Kale turned, his face hard. We can't take them head on, not yet. They'll swarm us, bleed us dry. Rin stepped forward, his voice low but urgent. Then we don't fight them head on. We use the veil, the ship's core. It's not just power, it's something else. It bends space, warps it. That's how it kept us alive when the reactor should have torn us apart. Mara's eyes narrowed. You're saying it can jump, not like the standard drives, Rin said, his hands trembling as he gestured to the glyphs. It doesn't move through space, it rewrites it. If we can harness it, we can vanish before they even lock weapons. Kale slammed his fist against the console. Or we tear ourselves apart trying. Mara rose from the throne, her gaze sweeping over them. We've been tearing ourselves apart for 6 years. Every mission, every lie, every death. If this ship is our weapon, then we use it. No hesitation. The crew fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down like gravity. Tally broke it first, her voice hoarse. Then give the order. Mara turned back to the throne, her fingers brushing the glyphs. They flared, silver light spilling across the bridge. She closed her eyes, reaching into the storm of data, feeling the ship's pulse sync with her own heartbeat. Vale, she whispered, her voice barely audible, take us. The deck shuddered. The stars outside twisted, their light bending into spirals. The viewport became a whirlpool of darkness, the void folding in on itself. The crew staggered, clutching at consoles, their stomachs lurching as reality itself buckled. Kale cursed, his knuckles white against the railing. God damn it, Mara, what have you done? But Mara stood tall, her eyes blazing. I've given us a chance. The ship screamed, a sound that wasn't sound at all but a vibration in their bones. The glyphs burned brighter, silver fire crawling across the walls, and then silence. The stars snapped back into place. The warships were gone. The system was empty. Rin collapsed against the console, his chest heaving. We did it. Kale's face was pale, sweat dripping down his temple. Or we just jumped into a grave we can't see yet. Mara lowered herself back into the throne, her hands steady on the armrests. Either way, we're not theirs anymore. We choose our battles now. Tally's voice was a whisper, trembling with awe. What are we fighting for, Mara? If the war was a lie, what's left? Mara's gaze hardened, her eyes like steel. We fight for the truth. For every body they buried under false banners, for every soldier they fed into the grinder, we fight until command answers for what they've done. The crew stared at her, their faces etched with fear, rage, and something deeper, resolve. Kale broke the silence, his voice low but steady. Then we make them blade. Mara nodded, her hand tightening on the glyphs. The ship pulsed in response, its core thrumming like a heartbeat. The Ashen Veil wasn't just a battleship anymore. It was alive, and it was theirs. Outside, the void stretched endless and cold, but for the first time in 6 years, Mara felt the fire of purpose burning in her chest. The war was a lie. But the battle, the real battle, was only beginning. Chapter 4, the Ashen Veil drifted in silence, its hull scarred from battles that now seemed like phantoms. The void pressed against the viewports, endless and indifferent, a black ocean swallowing every whisper of light. Inside, the crew moved with the taut precision of soldiers who had lost their war but not their discipline. Mara sat rigid in the command throne, her fingers brushing the glyphs etched into the armrests. They pulsed faintly, silver veins threading through the steel, alive with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She could feel the ship listening, waiting, hungering. Kale leaned over the tactical console, his jaw tight, eyes scanning the empty starfield. No contacts, no transmissions. It's like the system has been scrubbed clean. His voice carried the edge of suspicion, the kind that never left a soldier who had survived too many ambushes. Rin wiped sweat from his brow, his hands trembling as he adjusted the sensor arrays. Or it's a trap. Command doesn't just vanish. They're watching, waiting for us to slip. His words were brittle, but his movements were sharp, every keystroke deliberate. Tally hovered near the comm station, her eyes wide, her lips moving silently as if she were praying. She had always been the youngest, the one who still believed in the banners, the oaths. Now those banners were ash, and her faith was bleeding out of her with every passing second. Mara's voice cut through the tension, low and commanding. We're not waiting for them. We strike first. Kale, plot a course to the nearest relay hub. If command is hiding, that's where their lies will be anchored. Kale's fingers danced across the console, the holographic map blooming into existence. A lattice of stars, roots, and abandoned outposts stretched before them. He zoomed in on a relay hub orbiting a dead moon, its surface cratered and lifeless. There, Hub 7 Delta. It's supposed to be offline, but if Command's pulling strings, that's where they'll tie them. Rin's throat tightened. That hub was where the Third Fleet vanished. Thousands of ships, no wreckage, no distress calls, just gone. His voice cracked, the memory clawing at him. Mara's gaze hardened. Then we'll find out why, and if Command buried them, we'll dig up the bones. The ship shuddered as Kale engaged the drives. The glyphs flared, silver fire crawling across the walls, illuminating the crew in ghostly light. The ashen veil surged forward, its engines whispering like predators in the dark. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the ship. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown. Tally's voice trembled. What if we're wrong? What if the war wasn't a lie? What if we're just deserters? Kale snapped his head toward her, his eyes burning. Deserters, we bled for Command, we killed for them, and they fed us lies. That's not desertion, that's survival. Rin slammed his fist against the console, the sound echoing through the chamber. Survival doesn't mean justice. If we're going to fight, we need proof, evidence. Otherwise, we're just another rogue crew, hunted until we're dust. Mara rose from the throne, her steps deliberate, her presence heavy. She stood before them, her shadow stretching across the deck. Proof is what we'll take from Hub 7 Delta. Command thinks they erased the truth. They didn't count on us. They didn't count on the veil. The ship's core thrummed, a deep vibration that resonated in their bones. It was as if the ashen veil itself agreed, its hunger aligning with theirs. Ours bled into silence as the ship cut through the void. The crew moved like ghosts, each action precise, each thought weighed down by the enormity of their mission. Kel broke the silence, his voice low. Approaching Hub 7 Delta, no external activity, no patrols, it's dead. Rin's fingers flew across the sensors. Wait, there's something, faint energy signatures, buried deep. Like the hub's heart is still beating. Mara's lips curled into a grim smile. Then let's cut it open. The ashen veil descended toward the dead moon, its hull cloaked in shadow. The relay hub loomed ahead, a skeletal structure of steel and silence, its spires reaching like broken fingers into the void. Kale's hands tightened on the controls. Docking clamps engaged. We're locked. The crew gathered at the airlock, weapons slung, armor sealed. The corridor beyond was dark, the air stale, the walls etched with glyphs that mirrored those on the veil. Rin's breath caught. These symbols, they're the same. Command didn't build this, something else did. Mara's eyes narrowed, her voice ablade. Then Command isn't just lying, they're hiding, and whatever they're hiding is buried here. They moved through the corridors, their footsteps echoing, their weapons raised. The hub was silent, but the silence was alive, pressing against their ears, crawling beneath their skin. Tally's whisper broke the stillness. I don't like this, it feels wrong. Kale's jaw clenched. Wrong is what we came for. They reached the central chamber, its walls lined with consoles, its core pulsing faintly with silver light. The glyphs burned brighter as they entered, responding to their presence. Rin approached the console, his hands trembling as he activated the systems. The screens flickered, static bleeding into images. Soldiers, fleets, battles, and then shadows, figures cloaked in silver fire, their faces hidden, their voices a chorus of commands. The crew froze, their eyes locked on the images. Mara stepped forward, her voice steady. Play it all. The chamber filled with the echoes of war, orders given, fleets sacrificed, soldiers erased, and beneath it all the truth, the war was never against an enemy, it was against themselves. Command had orchestrated every battle, every death, every lie. Tally collapsed to her knees, her sobs breaking the silence. They killed us, all of us, for nothing. Kale's fists clenched, his teeth grinding. Not for nothing, for control, for power. They made us slaughter each other to keep us blind. Rin's voice was hollow, his eyes empty. We were pawns, disposable, and the fleets that vanished, they weren't destroyed, they were consumed. Mara's gaze burned, her voice a vow. Then we'll consume them, every lie, every secret, every drop of blood they spilled. We'll make Command choke on the ashes. The glyphs flared, silver fire engulfing the chamber, the hub trembling as if it were alive. The ashen veil pulsed in response, its core resonating with the truth. The crew stood together, their faces etched with rage, despair, and resolve. The war was a lie. But their battle, their real battle, had just begun, and in the silence of the void, the ashen veil whispered its hunger. Chapter 5, The Ashen Veil's Hunger. The Ashen Veil's command deck was a cathedral of steel and shadow, its vaulted ceilings lined with conduits that pulsed faintly like veins carrying blood. The crew stood in silence, the echoes of the revelation still gnawing at their minds. The war was a lie. Every fleet they had fought beside, every soldier they had mourned, every enemy they had cursed, fabrications, orchestrated slaughter. Mara's boots rang against the grated floor as she paced, her eyes locked on the central hololith. The projection shimmered with fractured glyphs, silver fire bleeding into jagged lines of data. Her jaw was clenched so tightly it ached, but she forced her voice into command. Kale, Rin, Tally, we are not broken, not yet. Command thinks we are pawns. They think we will kneel, but this ship is ours, this truth is ours, and we will wield it like a blade. Kale's fists were still trembling, knuckles white against the railing. His voice was gravel, low and dangerous. We can't fight them head on. Their fleets outnumber us 100 to 1. Their stations are fortified. Their intelligence networks run deeper than the void itself. If we strike like ghosts. We bleed them from the shadows. Rin leaned against the console, his face pale, eyes hollow. He had always been the quiet one, the analyst, the man who saw patterns in chaos. Now his voice was brittle but sharp. The fleets that vanished, they weren't destroyed. They were absorbed, folded into something else. Command has a weapon, something vast, something that consumes entire armadas. If we move without understanding it, we die screaming. Tally rose slowly from the floor, her cheeks streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she brushed them across the console. Her voice cracked, but there was steel beneath it. Then we find it. We find what they've built. We tear it open. We make them choke on their own lies. The hololith flared, glyphs rearranging themselves into a map of the void. Silver fire traced the outlines of sectors long abandoned, battlefields where fleets had vanished without a trace. Mara's eyes narrowed, her breath steady. There, she said, pointing to a cluster of coordinates deep in the ashen belt. That's where the signals converge. That's where the consumed fleets went. Command hides its rot in the shadows. We'll drag it into the light. Kale slammed his fist against the railing, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Then we set course, but we need tactics, we need silence, we need to vanish from their sensors. If Command suspects we know the truth, they'll send everything they have to erase us. Rin's fingers danced across the console, pulling streams of data into focus. His voice was cold, clinical. We can mask our signature. The Ashen Veil's core resonates with the glyphs. If we align the resonance with the void's natural distortions, we can cloak ourselves, but it will drain power. Weapons will be limited. Shields will be fragile. Mara's gaze burned into him. Then we fight without shields. We fight without weapons. We fight with the truth. Every battle we win, every secret we uncover, we broadcast it. We infect their networks with their own lies. We make their soldiers see what we've seen. We turn their pawns into rebels. Tally's lips curled into a bitter smile. A war of ghosts, a war of whispers, a war they can't control. The chamber trembled, the Ashen Veil's core pulsing in response. The ship seemed to hunger, its steel bones resonating with the crew's rage. Mara felt it in her chest, a vibration that was more than sound, more than energy. The ship was alive, it had tasted the truth, and it wanted blood. Kale turned, his eyes burning. We'll need to test the cloak. We'll need to strike small targets first. Outposts, relays, places where Command thinks no one is watching. We bleed them there. We learn their defenses. We sharpen our blade. Rin's voice was a whisper, but it carried weight. And we watch for the weapon, the thing that consumes fleets. If we find it, we don't engage, not yet. We study it. We learn how it feeds, and then we starve it. Mara's hand tightened around the railing, her knuckles white. Then it's decided. We set course for the Ashen Belt. We cloak, we strike, we spread the truth. And when Command comes for us, we make them drown in their own lies. The crew stood together, their faces etched with fury and resolve. The war was a lie, but their battle was real. The Ashen Veil's hunger was real. And in the silence of the void, the ship whispered its promise, vengeance. The engines roared to life, the deck trembling beneath their feet. The hololith flared, silver fire consuming the map, reshaping it into a path through the Ashen Belt. Mara's voice cut through the thunder, sharp and commanding. Crew of the Ashen Veil, we are no longer soldiers of Command. We are no longer pawns. We are hunters, and the void is our battlefield. Kale's fists unclenched, his voice a growl. Then let's hunt. The ship surged forward, its hull cloaked in resonance, its core burning with hunger. The void swallowed them whole, and the Ashen Veil whispered its song of war. But in the shadows of the Ashen Belt, something stirred. A presence vast and terrible, a weapon forged from lies and blood. It waited, silent, patient, hungry. And as the Ashen Veil vanished into the void, the War of Ghosts began. Chapter 6. The Ashen Veil drifted into the belt like a phantom, its hull cloaked in resonance fields that bent light and swallowed echoes. The stars themselves seemed to recoil from the ship's passage, dimming as if unwilling to bear witness. The Ashen Belt was no ordinary sector. It was a graveyard of shattered fleets, a labyrinth of wreckage and dust where the bones of warships floated like tombstones. The crew moved with a tension that bordered on ritual. Every step echoed against steel, every breath carried the weight of betrayal. Mara stood at the command dais, her silhouette framed by the cold glow of the hololith. Her eyes were locked on the shifting map, where fragments of broken cruisers and gutted carriers drifted in endless silence. Kale, she said, her voice sharp as a blade. Status on cloak integrity. Kale's hands danced across the console, his jaw clenched, resonance field holding, but the belt's interference is chewing at the harmonics. We're ghosts, but fragile ones. Fragile ghosts still haunt, Mara replied. The words hung heavy, and the crew absorbed them like scripture. Joran, the weapons officer, leaned against his station, his fingers twitching near the fire controls. His eyes scanned the void beyond the viewport, where the skeletal remains of a dreadnought loomed. Its hull was split open, ribs of steel jutting outward, a carcass picked clean by something unseen. Whatever killed that, Joran muttered, didn't use torpedoes, no scorch marks, no impact craters. It stripped the ship like flesh from bone. Silence followed. The crew had seen war, had lived in the furnace of battle, but this was different. This was predation. Mara's gaze flicked to the wreckage. The weapon feeds, it doesn't destroy for victory. It destroys for hunger. A shiver ran through the deck. Kale's voice was low, almost reverent, and command knew. They sent fleets into this belt knowing they'd be consumed, all to keep the lie alive. The hololith pulsed, marking a faint energy signature deeper within the belt. Mara's eyes narrowed. There, the heart of the graveyard, that's where it waits. The ashen veil adjusted course, its engines whispering against the void. The ship slid between fractured hulls and drifting debris, weaving through the remnants of battles that had never been real. Below decks, the crew prepared for the unknown. Armor was strapped on, rifles checked, blades sharpened. The corridors echoed with the sound of readiness, but beneath it all was fear, raw, unspoken, cold tight in every heartbeat. In the mess hall, Lieutenant Vera sat alone, her hands trembling around a cup of recycled water. She stared at the liquid, watching it ripple with the vibrations of the engines. Her mind replayed the revelation. The war was a lie, every death meaningless, every order a manipulation. She thought of her brother, lost in the siege of Helios. She thought of the medals pinned to her chest, now nothing more than tokens of deceit. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried venom. We were never soldiers, we were sacrifices. The intercom crackled. Mara's voice filled the hall, commanding, unyielding. Crew of the Ashen Veil, we approach the source. No hesitation, no fear. We are hunters and the prey is waiting. Vera rose, her spine stiffening. The cup clattered to the table, forgotten. She marched toward the armory, her steps heavy with resolve. On the bridge, the tension sharpened. The energy signature grew stronger, pulsing like a heartbeat. The hololith flickered, struggling to contain its magnitude. Kale's voice broke the silence. It's not a ship, it's something else. Organic patterns in the readings, living resonance. Joran's hand tightened on the fire controls. Then it bleeds. Mara's eyes burned. Not yet, we study. We learn, we starve it. The ashen veil drifted closer, and the void began to change. The stars warped, bending around an invisible mass. Shadows stretched unnaturally, and the wreckage of ships twisted as if pulled by unseen currents. Then they saw it. A shape vast and terrible, coiled within the belt's heart. It was neither machine nor beast, but something between, a fusion of steel and flesh, a predator born from war itself. Its hull was a lattice of broken ships, fused together into a grotesque skeleton. Pulses of crimson light throbbed within like veins carrying blood. The crew froze, breath caught in their throats. Kale whispered, "Gods help us." The creature stirred. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as if savoring the silence. Fragments of ships drifted toward it, drawn into its mass, absorbed like offerings. The ashen veil's sensors screamed, overwhelmed by the resonance. Mara's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold position, cloak at maximum, do not engage." The crew obeyed, though every instinct screamed to flee. The creature's eyes, or what passed for them, glowed with a terrible awareness. It turned slowly, its gaze sweeping across the void. The ashen veil trembled, its hull groaning under the weight of its presence. Joran's hand hovered over the fire controls, sweat dripping down his temple. "It sees us." "No," Mara snapped, "it feels us." "But it doesn't know yet, hold." The creature extended a tendril of fused steel and flesh, reaching toward a drifting cruiser. The tendril pierced the hull and the ship shuddered. Lights flickered, systems sparked, and then silence. The cruiser collapsed inward, its essence drained, its core extinguished. The crew watched in horror. Kale's voice was hoarse. "It feeds on power, on resonance. It drains ships dry." Mara's mind raced. Every detail mattered. Every movement was a clue. She forced herself to watch, to memorize, to understand. "We starve it," she whispered. "We cut off its food. We deny it fleets. We deny it war." The creature recoiled, its tendrils retracting. It shifted, sensing something beyond the belt. Its gaze turned outward, toward the stars, toward the war still raging in Command's lie. Mara's fists clenched. "It's hunting. It will leave the belt soon." The crew exchanged glances, fear etched into their faces. Joran growled, his voice trembling with fury. "Then we strike first. We bleed it before it feeds again." Mara's eyes locked on him, cold and unyielding. "No, we bleed it when it starves, not before." The creature stirred again, its massive form unraveling into the void. The ashen veil's cloak strained, resonance fields flickering. The ship groaned, as if resisting the predator's pull. Mara's voice was steel. "Crew of the Ashen Veil, we have seen the weapon, we have seen its hunger, now we know, and knowledge is our blade." Kale's jaw tightened, "Then we sharpen it." The Ashen Veil drifted back, retreating into the shadows of the belt. The creature remained, vast and patient, feeding on the graveyard of ships. But the crew carried its image in their minds, etched into their souls. They had seen the truth, they had seen the hunger. And in the silence of the void, the Ashen Veil whispered its promise, vengeance. Chapter 7, Episode 4. The rogue battleship's crew just found out their war is a complete lie. ASF, the ashen veil drifted deeper into the belt's shadow, its hull whispering against the silence of the void. The resonance fields hummed low, a predator's growl muffled beneath steel. Every corridor of the ship seemed to pulse with unease, as though the vessel itself had absorbed the crew's dread. Mara stood in the command pit, her boots magnetized to the deck, her eyes locked on the tactical hollow. The creature's silhouette lingered there, a phantom etched in light. It was vast, incomprehensible, a wound in reality itself. She could still feel its gaze, even though it had turned outward toward the war's command had fabricated. Her throat was dry, but her voice cut through the silence. We sharpen knowledge into a blade, that is our war now. The crew shifted uneasily. Kale leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, his jaw tight as if grinding stone. Joran paced like a caged beast, his heavy boots echoing against the deck. His fury was a storm barely contained. We wait for it to starve, Joran spat, his voice low but venomous. That thing doesn't starve, it consumes wreckage, fleets worlds, it will never be weak. Mara's gaze snapped to him, cold steel in her eyes. It will, everything hungers, even gods bleed when denied their feast. The words hung heavy, a doctrine carved from desperation. Kale finally spoke, his tone measured, deliberate. If we deny it fleets, we deny command as well. Their lie collapses when the creature cannot feed. But command will not allow that. They will hurl ships into its maw and call it victory. Silence fell again, broken only by the hum of the ashen veil systems. The crew knew the truth now. Their war was a fabrication, a theater designed to keep the beast alive. Every battle, every sacrifice had been fuel. Mara's fists clenched. Then we cut the arteries. We sever command's veins before they bleed us dry. The tactical hollow shifted, maps of the belt unraveling into threads of light. Mara traced them with her gloved hand, her movements sharp, precise. Supply lines, she said. Convoys, fuel depots, ammunition caches. Command feeds the war machine and the war machine feeds the creature. We strike the veins, not the beast. Joran's eyes burned. Sabotage, raids, starve the war before it starves us. Kale's voice was colder. Command will brand us traitors. They will hunt us with fleets. We will be outnumbered, outgunned. Mara turned to him, her expression unyielding. We already are, but we carry truth, and truth is heavier than fleets. The crew exchanged glances, the weight of her words pressing into their bones. They had seen the hunger, they had seen the lie, and now they carried rebellion in their veins. The ashen veil's corridors were dim, lit only by the red glow of emergency strips. The crew moved like shadows, their boots whispering against steel. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. In the armory, Joran inspected the weapons, his hands trembling with restrained fury. Plasma rifles, coil guns, breaching charges, all tools of war, all once wielded in service of command's deception. He slammed a rifle against the rack, the clang echoing like a curse. Every shot we fired, he growled, was a lie. Every kill, every death, all of it feeding that thing. Kale stood nearby, silent, his eyes scanning the racks. He finally spoke, his voice low. Then we fired differently now. Every shot cuts command's veins. Every kill starves the beast. Joran's lips curled into a snarl, but he nodded. His rage was a blade, and Mara had given it purpose. In the mess hall, the crew gathered, their faces pale in the dim light. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the hum of the ship's systems. Mara stood at the head, her presence commanding, her voice a blade slicing through despair. We are no longer soldiers of command, she declared. We are hunters. We hunt lies. We hunt hunger. We hunt the war itself, her words struck like hammer blows. The crew straightened, their fear tempered into resolve. Kale leaned forward, his voice steady. Targets, Mara's eyes narrowed. Convoys first. Fuel depots next. We bleed the war machine until command chokes on its own deception. Joran slammed his fist against the table, the sound reverberating through the hall. Then we strike hard, fast, no mercy. Mara's gaze swept across the crew, her voice cold and unyielding. Mercy is for the innocent. Command is not innocent. The creature is not innocent. We are the blade, and blades do not forgive. The ashen veil prepared for war. Engines roared, resonance fields crackled, and the ship's cloak shimmered like a shadow in the void. The crew moved with precision, their fear transmuted into purpose. Every corridor echoed with determination, every chamber pulsed with defiance. In the command pit, Mara stood tall, her eyes locked on the hollow. Convoy routes glowed like veins across the belt, pulsing with the lifeblood of command's deception. Plot intercept, she ordered. We strike the nearest convoy, we cut the vein. Kale's fingers danced across the console, his movements sharp, deliberate. Course plotted, convoy ETA, 6 hours. Joran's voice was a growl. Weapons primed, boarding teams ready. Mara's gaze hardened. Then we bleed them. The ashen veil slipped through the void, its cloak shimmering, its engines whispering against silence. The convoy loomed ahead, a cluster of freighters escorted by warships. Their hulls gleamed with command's insignia, symbols of a lie carved into steel. Mara's voice was steel. Target escorts, disable, not destroy. We want the freighters intact. Kale's hands moved swiftly, locking onto targets. Weapons locked. Joran's growl echoed through the pit. Then let's carve. The ashen veil struck like a predator. Plasma fire lanced through the void, tearing into escorts, shredding hulls. Resonance fields rippled, cloaking the ship in shadows. The convoy reeled, its formation collapsing. Boarding pods launched, streaking across the void, slamming into freighters. Joran led the charge, his rifle blazing, his fury unleashed. The corridors of the freighters echoed with gunfire, screams, and the thunder of boots. Cut the veins, Joran roared, his voice a storm. Burn the supplies. Explosions tore through cargo holds, fuel tanks ignited, ammunition caches erupted. The freighters bled fire into the void, their lifeblood spilling into nothingness. Mara watched from the command pit, her eyes cold, her voice steady. Starve the beast, starve the war. The convoy burned, its wreckage drifting into silence. The ashen veil loomed above, a shadow carved from defiance. The crew returned, their faces etched with exhaustion, their bodies trembling with adrenaline. Joran's armor was scorched, his rifle stained with ash. He collapsed into a chair, his breath ragged, his eyes burning. We cut the vein, he growled. We bled them. Kale's voice was calm, deliberate. Command will know, they will hunt us harder now. Mara's gaze was unyielding. Let them. Every fleet they send is another vein we cut. Every convoy we burn is another lie we expose. The crew fell silent, their resolve heavy, their defiance etched into their bones. They had seen the hunger, they had seen the lie. And now they carried rebellion in their veins. The ashen veil drifted into the shadows once more, its cloak shimmering, its engines whispering. The creature lingered beyond the belt, vast and patient, feeding on wreckage. But the crew carried its image in their minds, etched into their souls. They had seen the truth, they had seen the hunger, and in the silence of the void, the ashen veil whispered its promise, vengeance. Chapter 8. The ashen veil drifted in silence, its hull cloaked in the fractured shimmer of stolen stealth fields. The void beyond the belt was a graveyard of shattered freighters, their carcasses tumbling endlessly, spilling frozen cargo into the abyss. The crew gathered in the command pit, the air thick with the stench of scorched circuitry and sweat. Mara stood at the center, her boots planted firm against the deck plating, her eyes locked on the tactical hololith. The projection flickered, showing the wreckage they had left behind, burning convoys, ruptured fuel lines, drifting ammunition crates. Her voice was low, steady, but it carried the weight of command. They will come, she said, not with scouts, not with patrols. They will send fleets, they will send the hammer. Joran leaned against the bulkhead, his armor still blackened from the raid, his jaw clenched, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Let them, he rasped. We've bled them once, we'll bleed them again. Kale's hands moved across the console, his fingers precise, deliberate. He pulled up encrypted transmissions, intercepted fragments of command chatter. His voice was calm, but beneath it lay a tension like a drawn blade. They know it was us. The ashen veil is marked. They're mobilizing from the inner colonies, carrier groups, siege fleets. They'll hunt us until we're ash. The crew fell silent. The hum of the ship's engines filled the void between words. Mara's gaze swept across them. Soldiers, deserters, rebels forged in fire. Their faces were carved with defiance, but beneath it lay fear. She spoke again, her voice a storm contained. We cannot fight them head-on, not yet. We strike where they are weakest. Supply lines, communications. The veins until the beast starves. The hololith shifted, showing routes through the belt, hidden channels carved by miners long dead. Mara's hand traced the paths, her finger lingering on a cluster of relay stations. Here, she said, the relay nexus. Cut it and their fleet stumble blind. They will choke in their own silence. Joran pushed off the bulkhead, his movements heavy, deliberate. That's suicide, he growled. Those stations are fortified, automated turrets, drone swarms, garrison crews. We'll be torn apart before we breach the perimeter. Mara's eyes locked on his, unyielding. Then we tear them apart first. The words hung in the air, sharp as steel. Gale's voice broke the silence, measured, precise. We can ghost in. The cloak will hold if we thread the belt's shadow, but once we strike, the veil will falter, will be exposed. Mara nodded. Then we strike fast, we strike hard, and we vanish before the hammer falls. The crew shifted uneasily, their breaths heavy, their eyes flickering with doubt. The Ashen Veil was a rogue battleship, scarred and hunted, its systems patched with stolen tech, its hull stitched with scars. To face fortified stations was madness. But madness had carried them this far. Joran's fists clenched, his knuckles white against scorched armor. We'll need every gun, he said, every blade. Every soul willing to blade. Mara's voice cut through the tension. Then we bleed together. The command pit fell into motion. Consoles lit with tactical overlays, weapons crews checked their stations, engineers whispered curses as they coaxed life from battered systems. The Ashen Veil stirred, its engines whispering, its cloak shimmering like a phantom. In the lower decks, soldiers strapped into harnesses, their rifles gleaming under dim light. The air was thick with oil and ozone, the walls vibrating with the pulse of the ship. Joran moved among them, his presence heavy, his voice a growl. Listen, he said, his words sharp, commanding. We strike the nexus, we cut their throat. You will see fire, you will see death, but you will not falter, you will not break, you are the blade, you are the storm. The soldiers answered with silence, their eyes burning, their hands tightening on weapons. Above, Kale worked the consoles, his mind a storm of calculations. He threaded the ship through the belt's shadows, weaving paths between drifting wreckage and asteroid husks. His fingers danced across controls, his breath steady, his eyes locked on the shifting hololith. Mara stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the void ahead. Her thoughts were a storm contained, her resolve carved from steel. She had seen the lie, she had seen the hunger. And now she carried rebellion in her veins. The ashen veil drifted closer, its cloak shimmering, its engines whispering. The relay nexus loomed ahead, a cluster of stations carved into asteroid husks, their surfaces bristling with turrets, their shadows crawling with drones. The crew held their breath. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Mara's voice broke it, sharp and commanding. Weapons hot, cloak steady, prepare to strike. The ship stirred, its cannons awakening, its hull trembling with restrained fury. The soldiers braced, their rifles ready, their eyes burning. Kale's voice was calm, deliberate, cloak holding, trajectory locked. "We are in the shadow," Joran's growl cut through the tension. "Then let's bleed them." The ashen veil surged forward, its cloak shimmering, its cannons roaring. Fire tore through the void, ripping into turrets, shattering drones, burning through steel. The stations erupted in chaos, alarms screaming, defenses faltering. Mara's voice was a storm. "Burn them, cut the throat, starve the beast." Explosions tore through the nexus, fire spilling into the void, wreckage drifting into silence. The ashen veil bled fury, its cannons roaring, its soldiers storming. Joran's rifle spat fire, his armor scorched, his movements heavy, deliberate. He tore through drones, his growl echoing in the chaos. Kale's hands danced across consoles, his voice calm, precise. Cloak faltering, shield strained, "We must withdraw." Mara's eyes burned, her voice unyielding. "Not yet, cut deeper, burn harder." The crew fought with desperation, their breaths ragged, their bodies trembling. The stations bled fire, their defenses crumbling, their silence spreading. And in the chaos, the ashen veil whispered its promise, vengeance. The nexus burned, its wreckage drifting into silence. The ashen veil vanished into the shadows once more, its cloak shimmering, its engines whispering. The crew returned, their faces etched with exhaustion, their bodies trembling with adrenaline. Joran collapsed into a chair, his breath ragged, his eyes burning. "We cut the throat," he growled. "We bled them." Kale's voice was calm, deliberate. "Command will know, they will hunt us harder now." Mara's gaze was unyielding. "Let them, every fleet they send is another vein we cut, every station we burn is another lie we expose." The crew fell silent, their resolve heavy, their defiance etched into their bones. They had seen the hunger, they had seen the lie, and now they carried rebellion in their veins. The ashen veil drifted into the shadows once more, its cloak shimmering, its engines whispering. The creature lingered beyond the belt, vast and patient, feeding on wreckage. But the crew carried its image in their minds, etched into their souls. They had seen the truth, they had seen the hunger, and in the silence of the void, the ashen veil whispered its promise, vengeance. Chapter 9. The ashen veil drifted in silence, its hull cloaked in the shimmer of stolen light, its engines whispering like a predator's breath. The void pressed against the battleship's skin, a suffocating black that seemed to pulse with the memory of the stations they had gutted. Inside, the crew moved like shadows, their bodies heavy with exhaustion, their minds gnawed by the truth they could no longer escape. Mara stood at the command dais, her boots planted firm against the trembling deck. The air smelled of scorched circuitry and recycled sweat, the tang of war clinging to every surface. Her eyes swept across the bridge, catching the flicker of monitors, the twitch of hands over controls, the silent tremor of men and women who had seen too much. "Status," she barked, her voice cutting through the haze. Kale's fingers danced across the tactical console, his movements precise, deliberate, as though each keystroke carried the weight of survival. Cloak holding. Power reserves at 60%, hull integrity stable, but the forward plating is scorched. If they scan deep, they'll see the scars. Joran leaned against the bulkhead, his breath ragged, his face pale beneath the grime. His eyes burned with a feral light, the kind that came from killing and surviving too many times. "Let them see," he growled. "Let them know who cut them. Fear is a weapon sharper than steel." Mara's gaze hardened. "Fear is nothing if it doesn't break them. We need more than scars. We need blood." The words hung heavy, pressing against the crew's bones. They had already carved deep into the Empire's veins, but the hunger inside Mara was unyielding. She had seen the lie, tasted its rot, and now every breath was rebellion. The comms crackled, a whisper of static that carried the voice of Urin, the ship's sensor officer. Movement in the belt, multiple signatures, not patrol craft too heavy, looks like a hunter fleet. The bridge froze, the silence was suffocating, broken only by the hum of the ship's systems. Kale's jaw tightened. "Command has unleashed the hounds." Joran spat onto the deck, his voice a low snarl. "Good, let them come, we'll bleed them dry." But Mara's eyes narrowed, her mind racing through the calculus of survival. The ashen veil was powerful, but it was one ship against a fleet. Cloak or not, the hunters would scour the belt, and once they caught scent, they would not relent. Options, she demanded. Kale's fingers flew, maps of the belt unfolding across the screens, asteroid fields, wreckage zones, forgot mining stations. We can vanish into the debris, use the cloak to mask our heat, but if they sweep with graviton pulses, they'll find us. Urin's voice trembled, but her words were sharp. There's a derelict colony husk near Sector 9, abandoned after the famine wars. If we dock inside, cloak engaged, we might pass as wreckage. Joran's laugh was bitter, hollow. Hide in a graveyard, fitting. Mara's eyes burned, her voice unyielding. Set course, Sector 9. If we bleed on our terms. The ashen veil shifted, its engines whispering as it slid into the shadows of the belt. The crew moved with desperate precision, every motion heavy with the knowledge that the hunters were closing in. The colony husk loomed ahead, a vast carcass of steel and stone, its spires broken, its hull torn open by centuries of neglect. The silence around it was suffocating, a graveyard of forgotten lives. As the battleship drifted closer, the crew felt the weight of ghosts pressing against their skin. Docking clamps groaned as the veil slid into the husk's hollow belly. The ship shuddered, metal grinding against metal, until it settled into the carcass's embrace. Cloaks shimmered, engines whispered into silence, and the battleship became a shadow within a shadow. The crew gathered in the dim light of the bridge, their breaths ragged, their eyes hollow. Mara stood at the center, her voice low, commanding. We wait, we watch, and when they pass, we strike. Kale's gaze was steady, but his voice carried the weight of doubt. If they sweep, we're trapped, no room to maneuver, no escape. Mara's eyes locked onto his, unyielding. Then we fight. Every fleet they send is another vein we cut. Every hunter we burn is another lie we expose. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the hum of dying systems. The crew knew the truth. They were rebels against an empire built on deception, soldiers of a war that was nothing but a lie. And yet in the shadows of the husk, their resolve burned brighter than ever. Hours bled into silence. The hunters came, their ships vast and terrible, their engines roaring like predators in the void. Grav pulses rippled through the belt, waves of energy that clawed at the husk's skin. The ashen veil trembled, its cloak straining, its systems groaning under the assault. Urin's hands shook over the sensors. They're sweeping, too close. If they push harder, they'll see us. Joran's voice was a growl, his hand gripping the hilt of his blade as though steel could cut through the void. Then let them, I'm ready. Kale's fingers flew, rerouting power, bleeding heat into the husk's carcass. I can mask us for a moment, but if they linger, Mara's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and unyielding. Hold, do not break, the void is our ally, the husk is our shield. The hunters swept past, their pulses clawing at the husk, their sensors burning through the void. The crew held their breath, their hearts pounding, their bodies trembling with the weight of silence. And then slowly the hunters drifted away, their engines fading into the black. The bridge erupted in ragged breaths, relief bleeding into exhaustion. Joran collapsed into a chair, his laughter hollow, broken. We cut the throat, we bled them, and still they hunt. Kale's voice was calm, deliberate. Command will know, they will send more, they will not stop. Mara's gaze was unyielding, her voice burning with defiance. Let them. Every fleet they send is another vein we cut. Every hunter we burn is another lie we expose. The crew fell silent, their resolve heavy, their rebellion etched into their bones. They had seen the hunger, they had seen the lie. And now in the shadows of the husk, they carried vengeance in their veins. The ashen veil lingered, vast and patient, feeding on silence. And in the void the promise whispered once more, vengeance. Chapter 10, the ashen veils maw the husk's carcass drifted like a cathedral of ruin, its jagged ribs stretching into the void, blackened metal whispering against the silence. The ashen veil lay hidden within, its engines muted, its crew pressed into the shadows of steel and ash. Every breath was a trespass, every heartbeat a betrayal of silence. Mara stood at the prow of the bridge, her silhouette carved against the dim glow of dying consoles. Her eyes were fixed on the void beyond the fractured viewport where the hunters had vanished into the abyss. Yet she did not trust their absence. The void was never empty. It was a predator's den, and silence was its teeth. Kale's fingers moved with surgical precision, rerouting power through half-dead conduits, coaxing life from systems that had no right to breathe. Sparks hissed from the panels, the acrid scent of burning insulation filling the air. His jaw was clenched, his eyes hollow with exhaustion, but his hands never faltered. They'll sweep again, Kale murmured, voice low, steady. Their sensors will crawl back, they'll taste the husk's decay. If they linger, they'll find us. Joran leaned forward, his blade resting across his knees, the steel gleaming faintly in the dim light. His laughter was gone now, replaced by a grim silence. His eyes were sharp, predatory, fixed on Mara. Then we strike before they return, we bleed them again, we carve their throats before they know we're here. Mara's gaze did not waver, her voice was iron, forged in defiance. No, we wait, the husk shields us, the void cloaks us, patience is our weapon. Impulse is their snare. Joran's teeth ground together, his knuckles whitening against the blade's hilt. patience will kill us. Every moment we linger, command tightens its noose. They'll send fleets. They'll send fire and we'll be ash before we ever strike. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The crew's eyes flicked between Mara and Joran, their loyalty torn, their fear palpable. The lie of the war hung over them like a shroud, its weight pressing into their bones. They had seen the truth, tasted the rot beneath the banners, and now every choice was rebellion. Kale broke the silence, his voice calm, deliberate. We cannot fight every fleet. We cannot burn every hunter. But we can bleed them where it hurts. We can strike at the marrow. We can expose the lie. Mara turned, her gaze burning into Kale. And where is the marrow? Kale's fingers stilled, his eyes meeting hers. The relay, the spine of their deception. Every command, every order, every lie flows through it. If we cut it, the war unravels. The fleets scatter. The hunters lose their leash. The words hung in the air, heavy with promise, heavy with danger. The relay was no simple target. It was the heart of the machine, buried deep within the void, guarded by fleets, shielded by fire. To strike it was madness. To strike it was suicide. Joran's lips curled into a grim smile. Then let's be mad. Let's be suicide. Better ash in rebellion than chains in silence. Mara's gaze lingered on him, her eyes cold, unyielding. We would throw lives into the fire for vengeance. Joran's voice was a growl, his blade rising, gleaming in the dim light. Not vengeance, truth. If the war is a lie, then every death we've bled is a chain. I will not wear chains. The bridge trembled with the weight of his words, the crew's resolve hardening, their rebellion etched deeper into their bones. They had seen the hunger, they had seen the lie, and now in the shadows of the husk they carried vengeance in their veins. Mara's voice cut through the silence, sharp, commanding. Kale, plot the course. Joran, ready the strike teams. For the relay, Kale's fingers flew, his eyes narrowing as he coaxed life from the dying systems. The path is fire, the relay is guarded, we'll bleed before we ever reach it. Mara's gaze was unyielding. Then we bleed, but we bleed with purpose, we bleed with truth. The crew moved, their bodies trembling with exhaustion, their hearts pounding with defiance. Weapons were checked, blades sharpened, armor sealed. The ashen veil stirred, its engines whispering against the void, its carcass shedding silence for fire. Joran stood at the prow, his blade raised, his voice a growl that echoed through the bridge. We cut the marrow, we bleed the lie. And if we burn as truth. The ashen veil shuddered, its engines igniting, its carcass tearing free from the husk. The void trembled, the silence shattered, and the promise whispered once more, vengeance. The relay awaited, vast and patient, its spires clawing into the void, its shields burning with fire. Fleets lingered around it, hunters prowling, their sensors clawing at the abyss. The path was madness, the path was suicide, but the crew's resolve was iron. Kale's voice was calm, deliberate. Engines at half, shields bleeding, weapons primed. The void will cloak us for a moment, but once we strike, the fleets will swarm. Mara's gaze was fixed on the relay, her voice burning with defiance. Then let them swarm. Every fleet they send is another vein we cut. Every hunter we burn is another lie we expose. Joran's laughter returned, hollow, broken, but burning with fire. Let them come, let them bleed. The marrow will break and the lie will burn. The ashen veil surged forward, its engines roaring, its carcass tearing through the void. The relay loomed ahead, vast and patient, its spires burning with fire. The fleet stirred, the hunters prowled, and the void trembled with the promise of war. The crew's hearts pounded, their bodies trembling, their resolve etched into their bones. They had seen the hunger, they had seen the lie. And now in the shadows of the void they carried vengeance in their veins. The ashen veil struck, its weapons burning, its fire tearing into the relay's shields. The void erupted in chaos, fleets surging, hunters clawing, sensors burning. The relay shuddered, its spires trembling, its marrow bleeding. Mara's voice cut through the chaos, sharp, commanding. Hold, do not break. The void is our ally, the fire is our weapon, strike true. Joran's blade gleamed, his laughter echoing through the bridge. We bleed the marrow, we burn the lie. And if we fall as truth. The ashen veil burned, its carcass tearing through the void, its fire bleeding into the relay. The fleet swarmed, the hunters clawed, the chaos consumed. And in the shadows of the void, the promise whispered once more, vengeance. Chapter 11, the shattered relay, the ashen veil's hull screamed against the void, its plating trembling under the relentless barrage of relay-borne fire. The spires of the relay glowed like the bones of some ancient titan, bleeding light into the abyss, each pulse a hammer against the rogue battleship's shields. The bridge was a furnace of tension, every console flickering with warnings, every breath of the crew sharpened into blades of desperation. Mara stood at the command dais, her boots planted wide, her voice cutting through the storm. Stabilize the port shields, redirect reactor bleed into the forward batteries. We carve through or we die here. Her words were iron, but her eyes betrayed the weight pressing against her skull. The relay was not just a fortress, it was a cathedral of lies, a monument built to keep the truth buried beneath layers of fire and silence. And now, as the ashen veil clawed at its marrow, the fleet swarmed like carrion birds, eager to tear the rogue ship apart before it could expose the rot. Joran leaned against the tactical console, his blade resting across his knees, the steel humming with the ship's vibrations. His laughter was low, guttural, a sound that unsettled even the hardened veterans around him. They bleed us, Mara, they bleed us because they fear us. Every strike we land is a wound in their illusion. Let them come. Let them choke on their own blood. The crew moved like shadows, their hands flying across controls, their bodies taut with exhaustion and fury. Sparks rained from ruptured conduits, smoke curled through the vents, and the deck plates trembled with each impact. The Ashen Veil was no pristine warship, it was a carcass, scarred and battered, but alive with defiance. Hunter Wings inbound, barked Kale from the sensor pit, his voice hoarse. 6 formations, vectoring from the relay's southern spire, fast, coordinated, they're trying to box us in. Mara's jaw tightened. Deploy the shroud mines, scatter them wide. Force the hunters into the debris field. The order rippled through the ship. Deep in the launch bays, crews wrestled with the heavy pods, their hands slick with oil and blood. The mines were crude, unstable, but deadly, each one a shard of vengeance waiting to detonate. As they spilled into the void, their trails shimmered like broken glass, weaving a net of chaos across the hunters' path. The first winged doves, sleek and merciless, their hulls gleaming with the insignia of the Dominion. They cut through the dark like blades, their weapons flaring, but the mines answered, erupting in bursts of fire and shrapnel. Hulls split, wings shattered, screams echoed across comms before silence swallowed them whole. The bridge shook with the impact of return fire. Consoles flared, alarms shrieked. Mara gripped the railing, her knuckles white. Hold formation, do not falter. The void is ours, Joran rose, his blade catching the glow of burning consoles. They are not hunters, they are hounds leashed to a master who fears the truth. And we, his voice rose, a roar that filled the bridge. We are the fire that severs the leash. The crew answered with silence, but their eyes burned. They had seen the lie unravel, thread by thread, in the blood-soaked corridors of war. They had watched comrades die for illusions, for orders carved from deceit. And now, in the shadow of the relay, they fought not for victory, but for revelation. The relay itself trembled under the Ashen Veil's assault. Its spires cracked, its shields faltered, its marrow bleeding into the void. Yet it endured, vast and patient, as though mocking the rogue ship's defiance. Kale's voice broke through the chaos. Central spire destabilizing, energy reading spiking. If it collapses, the whole relay could fracture. Mara's eyes narrowed. Then we drive the blade deeper, target the spire's core. All batteries converge fire. The Ashen Veil roared. Its cannons spat fury, its lances carved into the spire's heart. The void lit with fire, shadows dancing across the fractured hull. The relay shuddered, its bones groaning, its light flickering, but the fleets pressed closer. Dozens of warships, their hulls gleaming with Dominion sigils, encircled the rogue vessel. Their weapons locked, their engines burning. The Ashen Veil was a lone predator, bleeding, cornered, yet unbroken. Mara's voice was steel. Prepare for breach. If they board us, we fight tooth and blade, no surrender. Joran's laughter rose again, hollow and wild. Let them board, let them taste the marrow of truth. We will carve it into their bones. The crew braced. Weapons were drawn, blades unsheathed, armor sealed. The corridors of the Ashen Veil became trenches, every bulkhead a barricade, every shadow a trap. The first boarding pods struck, their claws tearing into the hull. The sound was a scream of metal, a wound ripped open. Dominion soldiers poured through, their armor black, their visors glowing. They moved with precision, their rifles spitting fire. But the crew of the Ashen Veil met them with fury. Blades clashed, rifles barked, bodies fell. The corridors became rivers of blood, the walls echoing with screams. Mara's orders cut through the chaos, sharp and relentless. Hold the choke points, bleed them in the narrow halls, make them pay for every step. Joran moved like a phantom, his blade singing, his laughter echoing. He carved through soldiers, his movements brutal, merciless. Each strike was a message, each kill a revelation. The relay's spire groaned, its core trembling. Energy surged, arcs of lightning tearing through the void. Kale's voice was frantic. Core breach imminent. If it collapses, the fleets will scatter. But we're too close, we'll be caught in the blast. Mara's eyes burned. Then we ride the fire, redirect all power to engines. We break free or we burn with them. The Ashen Veil surged, its engines screaming, its hull tearing against the void. The relay's spire erupted, a storm of fire and lightning consuming the abyss. Warships shattered, hunters burned, the void itself trembled. The Ashen Veil clawed through the storm, its carcass bleeding, its crew screaming defiance. The blast tore at its hull, ripped at its shields, but it endured, scarred yet alive. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. The relay was gone, its spires reduced to ash, its marrow scattered across the void. The fleets lay broken, their remnants drifting, their lie exposed in fire. Mara stood at the dais, her chest heaving, her eyes hollow yet burning. We are not done, the lie still breathes, but tonight we have carved truth into its bones. Joran's laughter was softer now, almost human, yet still edged with madness. The marrow bleeds, the lie burns. And we are the fire that remains. The ashen veil drifted through the wreckage, its crew battered, its hull scarred, but its spirit unbroken. In the silence of the void, vengeance whispered once more, louder than ever, truth. Chapter 12, Ashen Veil's Last Oath. The ashen veil drifted like a wounded predator through the graveyard of shattered fleets. Hull plating peeled back in jagged scars, conduits bled sparks into the void, and the ship's heartbeat, the thrum of its reactors, was a ragged, uneven pulse. The crew moved through the corridors with the silence of soldiers who had seen too much, their boots clanging against steel that trembled with every breath of the dying engines. Mara stood at the command dais, her hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles whitened. The bridge was dim, lit only by the flicker of failing hollow panels and the ghostly glow of drifting wreckage outside. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. Status. Kale's fingers danced across the cracked console, his jaw clenched. Engines at 30%, shields are gone, hull integrity compromised across 6 decks. We're bleeding atmosphere in the aft barracks, but containment fields are holding for now. Joran leaned against the bulkhead, his laughter low, broken, yet carrying a strange rhythm. We clawed through the storm, Mara. We lived, but the lie still breathes. It's coiled in the marrow of the void. His eyes gleamed with a madness that was no longer entirely madness. It was clarity sharpened by fire. Mara's gaze swept the bridge. Every face was hollowed, every soul scarred, yet none had broken. They had seen the fleets burn, the relay collapse, the truth carved into ash, and now they stood at the edge of something greater, something darker. Crew, she said, her voice steady, commanding. We are not survivors. We are not victims. We are the blade that cuts the lie. The war was a fabrication, a theater of blood staged to keep us chained. But now the chains are broken, the fleets are scattered, the relay is gone. And we are the fire that remains. Her words hung heavy in the air, a vow etched into steel. Kale's eyes flicked to the tactical display, its fractured light painting his face in ghostly hues. We've intercepted fragments of transmissions. The high command is silent, their puppets are burning, but there's movement, signals converging near the Orion rift. Something's gathering. Mara's lips tightened. The architects of the lie. Joran's laughter rose, sharp and jagged. Yes, the marrow calls. The architects gather to weave their falsehood anew, but we will be there. We will tear their veil apart. The bridge shuddered as the engines coughed, a guttural roar echoing through the hull. Sparks cascaded from overhead conduits, showering the crew in light that felt like fire. Mara did not flinch. Redirect all power to propulsion, she ordered. We set course for the rift. If the architects breathe, we choke them. If they gather, we scatter them. If they lie, we carve truth into their bones. Kale hesitated, his voice low. We're crippled, Mara. One more storm like the relay and we'll be dust. The crew, they're exhausted. We've lost too many. Mara turned, her eyes burning with a fire that refused to die. Exhaustion is the marrow of truth. Loss is the blood of defiance. We are not a fleet. We are not an army. We are a single blade honed by fire. And a single blade can cut deeper than 1,000 dull ones. Silence followed, broken only by the hum of dying systems. Then one by one the crew straightened. Their eyes met hers, hollow yet burning. They understood. Joran's grin widened, his voice a whisper that slithered through the air. The fire remains. The ashen veil turned, its engines screaming against the void, its hull bleeding sparks like a comet of defiance. The wreckage of fleets drifted behind, silent witnesses to the truth carved in ash. Ahead the Orion rift loomed, a wound in the fabric of space, a scar where the architects gathered. The corridors of the ship echoed with movement. Soldiers strapped on battered armor, their hands trembling as they loaded rifles scarred by fire. Engineers patched conduits with bare hands, their knuckles bleeding as they forced life into dying systems. Medics whispered prayers over the wounded, their voices trembling yet unbroken. Every soul aboard the ashen veil knew the truth. They were marching into the abyss, but they marched nonetheless. On the bridge, Mara stood tall, her eyes fixed on the rift. This is our oath, she said, her voice carrying through the ship's comms. We are the ashen veil, we are the fire that remains. And we will carve truth into the marrow of the void. The rift grew closer, its edges shimmering with unnatural light, its depths whispering promises of madness. The crew felt its pull, a gravity that was not gravity, a hunger that was not hunger. Kale's voice trembled as he read the sensors. Energy signatures massive, structures woven into the rift itself. It's not a fleet, something else, something older, something vast. Joran's laughter was sharp, almost joyous. The architects. The marrow of the lie, we will bleed them. The ashen veil screamed into the rift, its engines burning, its hull tearing, its crew defiant. The void trembled, the lie quivered, and the fire remained. Mara's hand tightened on the railing, her voice a whisper meant for herself, yet carried by the ship's comms. We are not done, not until the marrow itself burns. The rift swallowed them whole, and in that moment the ashen veil ceased to be a ship. It became a blade, a fire, a truth carved into the bones of the void. The crew did not falter, they did not break. They marched into the abyss, their oath burning brighter than the stars. The lie had been exposed, the architects awaited. And the ashen veil was coming.